Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I see the debate is slowing tonight. I thought I had a few more minutes to prepare, but I'm happy to speak about my concerns with relation to Bill C-68. Certainly, a number of my colleagues have raised the troubling situation that we're debating a fisheries bill that has some provisions related to fish habitat. There's been some great comments, including from an NDP member who has some experience as a biologist. I think that's when our debates here are at their best. But unfortunately, this debate is also under a bit of a cloud, considering that the Ethics Commissioner is now adding the Fisheries Minister to the list of ministers of this government whose actions are going to be examined with respect to the awarding of a fishing-related license, Madam Speaker. So it's unfortunate because that is a cloud hanging over this debate. And I've heard on several occasions many members of the Liberal Party making suggestions that in the previous government, fisheries management and fisheries licenses did not take into consideration Aboriginal treaty rights and Aboriginal participation in both a customary or a traditional fishery and a commercial fishery, despite the fact, Madam Speaker, that evidence shows that that is not true. In fact, if you look at some of the press releases and media advisories with relation to fishery license competitions or proposals, requests for groups to bid, the consultation and participation of First Nation communities were a part of that, Madam Speaker. So it's unfortunate that some of the commentary that some of our members, including the member from Sackville Eastern Shore, making suggestions that aren't supported by a cursory examination of what was happening in the last government, Madam Speaker, and that concerns me. So the bill is before the House under this cloud of yet another minister being examined for ethical conduct with the awarding of a fisheries license to a group of proponents that didn't have a boat, but they had certainly a number of connections, both deep and familial, to the Liberal government. And that seemed to eclipse consideration for any experience actually on the sea, Madam Speaker. And as someone that did fisheries patrols with our Navy and with our Air Force on the Flemish Cap, Madam Speaker, I'm very proud of our heritage fishing and the fishers engaged in the practice. It's a hard living. And as my colleague from British Columbia, our friend, the fisheries critic, has highlighted the tremendous work of Canadians, and they should know that any group has the ability to bid for these licenses, because it is a monopoly, Madam Speaker. This is a very, very serious power the government has. And now it is the third minister now being examined for how they've used that power. The first minister to be examined is actually the Prime Minister, the first in both ways, the first minister. And the findings on his investigation, as we know, were guilty. There's one outstanding with the Finance Minister and now the Fisheries Minister. So we can't forget that in the consideration of this bill. There's also two other big concerning parts of Bill C-68 that should concern Canadians, because not only do we already think that there's a cozy relationship with some of the most recent fisheries proponents awarded a contract by the minister, close Liberal ties, Madam Speaker, they're enshrining that with advisory boards in Bill C-68 in legislation, paid advisory boards to advise the minister. Why is that, Madam Speaker? He has a department that has done that quite well for over a century, in combination with consultations with stakeholders, industry groups, unions, First Nations. Why this new advisory board needs to be employed and paid and staffed, it reminds us of the illiberal approach of surrounding themselves with more friends to tell them they're doing a great job. They're not, Madam Speaker, and we're going to hear from the Ethics Commissioner on that. There is also the ability for the minister to withhold critical information from bid proponents, Madam Speaker, considering everything that's going on. That should concern Canadians as well. But I'm going to speak for the third time, with the remainder of my time, about the ideological creep, once again, of this government, enshrining directly the precautionary principle into legislation with very little to no debate. I've raised this before with the Oceans Act and the classification of marine protected areas and spaces, Madam Speaker. I raised it a few weeks ago with respect to the Federal Sustainable Development Act, Madam Speaker, and here we are today with the Fisheries Act, another very strategic placement of the precautionary principle. In Section 2.5, considerations for decision-making, Madam Speaker, the first consideration listed as A, application of a precautionary approach. Now, that's listed along with a number of grounds. The precautionary approach, the precautionary principle, the same thing, Madam Speaker. What do they also list in the considerations for decision-making? This, the government that when they were in opposition used to always talk about science-based and evidence-based decision-making. What do they list in decision factors that the minister can take into consideration? The precautionary approach, number A. C, so the third consideration is scientific information. I guess they're going to have to look at that. D, Indigenous knowledge. E, community knowledge. G, social, economic, and cultural factors. I, the intersection of sex and gender with other identity factors. Madam Speaker, this is about fisheries and decisions related to fisheries. Beyond science, beyond the people that fish, and beyond our First Nations, that should be the consultations and factors in decision-making. The creeping edge of the precautionary principle, and now even intersectionality, another political measure being inserted into this, I'm astounded. Any time there was a decision made in relation to advancing projects related to resource development or other things, the Conservatives were accused of ideological underpinnings driving to support business and tear down environmental considerations. That wasn't the truth. Certainly we wanted certainty for proponents. But Madam Speaker, this is now the third bill where I'm talking about a direct ideological approach being embedded in legislation that is not even rooted in science. I've said before, the concerns about the precautionary principle being the guiding force has been criticized roundly. In fact, by President Obama's one of his most senior advisors, the White House chair of regulatory affairs, Professor Cass Sunstein, Madam Speaker. And his quote, which I've used a few times, is the precautionary principle, for all its rhetorical appeal, is deeply incoherent, end quote. Why is that, Madam Speaker? Because it allows people to make decisions based on a hunch, based on a concern, based on a we better act, as some people have described it, better safe than sorry. But what was talked about when this principle was first advanced? Back at the Rio Climate Conference, when any consideration of the precautionary principle was advanced, it was suggested at that point that it could only be considered when there was serious or irreversible harm demonstrated before precaution might come in. Now, this government, through many pieces of legislation, without much serious scrutiny, I might add, Madam Speaker, apart from the Conservatives raising it from time to time, is embedding in the precautionary principle and a list of cultural, social, other factors where they can make decisions related to sustainability of fisheries. It's preposterous, Madam Speaker. It should concern people. It's giving them enough wiggle room to do whatever they want based on how they feel. Where does this come from, Madam Speaker? One of the big groups pushing for the precautionary principle to govern and to actually supersede science was the World Wildlife Foundation, or Federation. We certainly know where their former head is working now, the PMO lead, Madam Speaker. I think that should concern Canadians, that those approaches and those things advocated for are now being systematically put into legislation without any serious discussion and directly contrary to what science suggests, not even putting an approach that irreversible harm should be the standard before this approach is used. They are by stealth providing an ideological approach to make decisions without scientific certainty. And when it comes to our fisheries, we should be proud that the Conservative government, John Crosbie, we remember making a tough decision about the cod fishery based on science in the face of people protesting and threatening harm, because it was based on science, not on a hunch and not on ideology. So this is the third bill, Madam Speaker. Canadians should wake up to how ideological and unscientific this government is.